The pilot has been in the air for hours, and the fuel gauge has become the only instrument that matters. The light is nearly gone over the Coral Sea, the last of the sun draining out of the western sky, while the east has already turned black. Somewhere below him is the carrier that means survival. Then he sees them, the unmistakable shapes of flight decks, running dark but just visible against the faint sheen of the water. Relief floods through him. He drops into the landing pattern, flicks on his navigation lights, and reaches for his signal lamp to tell the ship he is coming home. He is about to try to land on an American aircraft carrier. He does not know that yet. For the next several minutes, neither do the Americans. This is the story of those minutes, the only documented time in the history of naval warfare that enemy aircraft flew into an opposing carrier's landing pattern and were very nearly welcomed aboard. To understand how a Japanese aviator ended up circling USS Yorktown in the dark, mistaking her for home, you have to go back to the morning of May 7, 1942, and to a battle that was rewriting the rules of war as it was being fought. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first naval engagement in history in which the opposing fleets never saw each other. No battleship duel, no lines of ships trading broadsides over the horizon. Instead, two Japanese fleet carriers, Shōkaku and Zuikaku, and two American carriers, Yorktown and Lexington, spent the day hunting each other across hundreds of miles of open ocean, each launching aircraft to find and kill a target its crews would never lay eyes on directly. The Japanese were pushing toward Port Moresby on the southern coast of New Guinea, a move that would have put them within striking range of Australia. The Americans had come to stop them. And all day long, the two forces groped through the vast blue nothing, and neither one could find the other's main body. It was a battle of scouts and guesses. Whoever located the enemy first would land the first blow, and in a carrier war, the first blow often decided everything. Late in the afternoon, the Japanese decided to gamble. Rather than wait for a perfect sighting, Rear Admiral Hara sent off a special strike of his most experienced crews to sweep toward the Americans' estimated position and hit them at dusk. From the decks of Shōkaku and Zuikaku, 27 aircraft lifted off into the failing light. Picked veterans, led by a commander who had already flown over Pearl Harbor months earlier. These were not green pilots. They were among the most experienced carrier aviators in the world, and they were being sent to finish the American flat tops before nightfall. There was only one problem. They never found the carriers. The strike swept out to the search area and found nothing but water. No carriers, no ships, no targets, just the ocean going gray and then black beneath them as the sun dropped. And while they hunted in vain, American radar had picked them up. Grumman Wildcat fighters from Yorktown and Lexington climbed to meet them and tore into the formation. In the swirling fight that followed, the Japanese lost aircraft they could not afford to lose, around 9 of them, and the survivors found themselves scattered, low on fuel, and a very long way from home in the dark. There was no point carrying heavy ordnance now. The crews salvoed their bombs and torpedoes into the sea to lighten the aircraft and stretch every remaining gallon of fuel. Then they turned back toward where they believed their carriers waited and began the long, tense flight home, navigating by dead reckoning over an ocean that gave them nothing to steer by. By the time the survivors neared the fleet, the last daylight was almost gone, still faintly bright in the west, fully dark in the east. And this is where the story tips from an ordinary account of a failed strike into something almost surreal. Ahead in the gloom, several of the Japanese pilots spotted the shapes they had been praying to find. Carriers. Big ones, moving through the water, exactly where a tired and frightened aviator running low on fuel would desperately want them to be. After hours in the air, after the ambush, the losses, and the long, blind flight back, home was finally in sight. They set up their approach. Coming in from the starboard side, they switched on their navigation lights, announcing themselves the way you do among friends, and began flashing recognition signals toward the ships with their Aldi's lamps. They slid into the landing pattern and prepared to come aboard. The carriers below them were Yorktown and Lexington. Now hold that image for a moment, because it is genuinely staggering. Japanese naval aviators, in the middle of a shooting war, were lining up to land on the very American carriers they had spent all day trying to sink. And they had no idea. In the failing light, one carrier silhouette looks much like another. Exhausted, fuel-starved, and desperate to believe, the pilots saw what they needed to see. And here is the part that turns it from a Japanese blunder into a shared, almost comic catastrophe. The Americans very nearly let them land. Aboard Yorktown, crewmen watched the aircraft approach, watched them flash their recognition signals, watched them settle into the pattern. The signals didn't quite make sense. They weren't the codes the Americans expected, but there was something so routine, so unhostile about the whole scene that nobody opened fire. The planes weren't attacking. They weren't diving or maneuvering. They were doing exactly what a friendly aircraft does when it wants to come home. And critically, the Americans were expecting company. Their own Wildcats were due back from patrol, and the radar picture fit perfectly. So the natural assumption clicked into place. These must be our fighters returning to land. For several long moments, up and down the deck, nobody grasped that they were staring at enemy aircraft calmly joining their landing circle. The Japanese planes crossed ahead of the American formation and swung around toward Yorktown's port side, still flying the pattern, still expecting a signal to land. One pilot, by several veteran accounts, had actually begun settling toward the deck for a textbook landing. Then somebody looked harder. The shapes were wrong. These aircraft didn't have the stubby profile of an F-4F Wildcat. They had fixed landing gear, legs hanging down that no Wildcat had. These weren't American fighters at all. They were a mix of Aichi dive bombers and torpedo planes. Japanese aircraft, in the landing pattern, directly overhead. The realization went off like a spark in dry grass. The lead pilot slammed his throttle forward and jinked away at the last second. Anti-aircraft crews swung their guns up and opened fire, and in seconds, the sky was laced with tracer. Streams of glowing rounds arcing up into the formation the ship had nearly guided in to land. For the Japanese pilots, it was the worst possible way to learn the truth. One instant, they were on approach to what they thought was home. The next, that home was trying to blow them out of the air. They understood, all at once, that they had very nearly set their wheels down on an enemy carrier's deck. And the chaos only compounded, because at that exact moment, the real American Wildcats were also coming back to land. Now friendly and enemy aircraft were tangled together in the same patch of sky, over ships whose gunners were firing at anything with fixed gear. And in the confusion, some of the American fighters found themselves flying through their own fleet's anti-aircraft fire. Friendly tracer, enemy planes, friendly planes, all knotted together in the dark. According to Yorktown veterans who were there, the radio net filled instantly with language that was, in their words, colorful even by Navy standards. Pilots and gunners and officers all shouting over one another. One American aviator, watching his own ship's flak burst around him, reportedly radioed down something to the effect of, "What are you shooting at me for?" The Japanese crews were in no shape to do anything about it. They'd thrown their bombs into the sea hours ago. They had nothing to attack with, even if they'd wanted to. So they did the only sane thing left. They broke off, hauled away from the storm of tracer, and vanished back into the darkness to search for their actual carriers. By around 8 o'clock that night, the two carrier forces were still drifting through the blackness, roughly 100 miles apart, close in the scale of an ocean, impossibly far for pilots flying on fumes. The Japanese carriers knew their air crews were out there, lost and running dry, and Admiral Hara made a bold and dangerous choice. He ordered his carrier's big searchlights switched on and aimed straight up into the night, turning his own ships into brilliant beacons visible for miles. In a war where a carrier's survival depended on staying hidden, lighting yourself up like a lighthouse was an enormous risk. But it was the only way to bring the men home. It partly worked. One by one, exhausted crews spotted the beams, corrected course, and followed them back. But it was a ragged homecoming, not the clean rescue tidier retellings suggest. Of the 27 aircraft that had launched, only around 18 made it back to the fleet at all. And even then, landing blind and out of fuel, several cracked up or were so badly damaged coming aboard that they were pushed over the side. Men and machines were lost in the dark that night to nothing more than empty tanks and bad luck. They had lost the strike. They had nearly landed on the enemy, and only a fraction of them had made it home in one piece. There's a story often attached to this night, that the Japanese aircraft lined up on final approach and were waved off at the last second by Yorktown's landing signal officer before they could touch down. It's a vivid image, and you'll see it repeated, but there's no solid evidence for that specific version, and the pilots most likely caught their mistake a beat earlier on their own. In all probability, that flourish is just a good sea story, the kind that grows a little in the retelling. The truth needs no embellishment. Enemy pilots flew calmly into an American carrier's landing pattern, one of them nearly touching down, before anyone on either side understood what was happening. To this day, it remains the only documented case of aircraft trying to land aboard an enemy carrier. A few minutes of shared confusion in the dark that no one who lived it ever forgot. That's the story of the night the war got confused in the dark, when tired men on both sides very nearly made history by accident. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.